Good morning. My goodness, what an amazing group, just wonderful energy. Thank you to Creative Mornings for inviting me to be here. Thank you all for being here. So my name is Erin Ehmke, and the broad hat that I wear professionally is that of a primatologist. So I'm someone who studies primates. So for the past 25 years, I've worked with primates, various species, both in captivity and in the wild. I grew up wanting to be Jane Goodall, but how do you become Jane Goodall? Spoiler alert, you can't. She is amazingly unique, but she certainly inspired my career path. And I'll delve deeper into my journey as we get deeper into the talk, but first I want to set the stage, or continue to set the stage, for this month's theme of sanctuary. So the most encompassing definition for sanctuary is a place of refuge and protection. Now, as humans, we can seek refuge, and we can voice the need for protection and what we need protection from. But for those who can't voice that they need protection or who can't seek refuge, how do we apply the term sanctuary? And more specifically, I'm going to be referring to non-human species, and even more specifically to wild animals. Now, what would wild animals consider sanctuary? If it's an animal that needs protection from ecological stressors or risks, such as predation or food insecurity, then they could possibly find that protection in captivity. For animals that need protection from humans, then possibly they could find that protection in their natural habitats, although it is harder and harder to find natural habitats that aren't disturbed by humans. So both captivity and the wild, oops, where are we at here? There we go. So both captivity and the wild can provide protection, but in completely divergent ways. And unfortunately, for most animals, especially wild animals, they don't have a choice which environment they find themselves in. And it's either truly a sanctuary, because the benefits of one are offset by the risks of the other. So I'm going to delve a little bit deeper into this. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. For those of us looking to protect wild animals, on what level should we protect? How are we protecting them? Are we protecting them as individuals, as species, or are we protecting the genetics? So all the levels are important, but the needs for each differ. And so therefore, what would be considered sanctuary for each differs. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into each of these three levels, and in doing so, kind of walk through my journey, my career path. So I got my start at a traditional sanctuary. This was a sanctuary that takes in abused, neglected, unwanted, confiscated monkeys from the entertainment and pet industry. I was kind of floundering at that point in my life, to be honest. I was just finishing up my degree in wildlife ecology and conservation, and I didn't know what step to take next in order to become Jane Goodall. I was still searching. This sanctuary kind of became my sanctuary. It set my path in motion. Now, let me go back here. Sanctuaries truly focus on the individual. So they take in individuals in need, and they focus on their individualized and usually very unique needs. So most of these animals come from the entertainment or the pet industries. They behaviorally are often not even considered the same species as their wild counterparts, because they often grew up in a species isolated environment. They were separated from their moms and from their own species at a very young age, typically as young infants. So they didn't grow up naturally. Behaviorally, in terms of their social structure, they don't exist as that species. They often develop severe neuroses, growing up in captivity, isolated from their own species, sometimes as severe as self-mutilation. Rocking, pacing, those are very common. And they're often overly humanized, where they're more comfortable with humans than they are with their own species. And this is a very dangerous situation for both the humans and the animals involved. And so it's a very sad situation, and those working in sanctuaries work their butts off to, first of all, wean them off of human attention, the need for human attention, and then provide them with an amazing amount of enrichment, things to keep them mentally and physically stimulated, to challenge them, to help them develop their skills that they should be having as their species: exploration, curiosity, foraging, so on and so forth, and eventually socialize them with other animals instead of with humans. Even if it's a different species, it's all about companionship, just making that animal in their life a little bit happier and a little bit healthier. So in this picture here, oops, there's no picture there. In this picture here, we have Bailey on the left and Gizmo on the right. They're two juvenile capuchin monkeys, but two different species. Bailey's a white-faced capuchin and Gizmo is a brown capuchin. In the wild, they never would have come in contact with each other. But in the sanctuary, they were both juveniles and they just needed a buddy. And they became socialized together and were the best of buds. So sanctuaries do critical work for the individuals that they take care of to make their lives happier and healthier throughout their life. So the sanctuary became my life. I started volunteering there, I became head keeper, and then eventually I became director. But over the years, it became very obvious to me that it was going to be a constant struggle to find funding through donors. And that in order to become more competitive for foundation and for grant funding, I needed more education. And I also was really craving to experience what these monkeys should be experiencing. I wanted to know just how different these captive monkeys, who came from really disturbing backgrounds, how different was their behavior from their wild counterparts. So to make a long story short, my goodness, I cannot figure this one out. To make a long story short, I went to grad school. And I spent 2 years living in Suriname, South America, working with brown capuchin monkeys. This became my sanctuary. This was my spiritual sanctuary. I felt at peace in Suriname, in the middle of the jungle. For my master's, I studied juvenile social behavior and how juveniles develop social relationships. For my PhD, I studied female behavior and stress. Essentially, what stresses them out in the wild, and do they use social support to prevent and mediate that stress, just like human females often do. Now, the wild is truly their natural refuge. The sanctuary, it's their sanctuary where they adapted to best survive and thrive. But since they're still vulnerable to risks in the wild, it doesn't meet the definition of a true sanctuary. However, it's where these individuals, their social structure, and their social behavior exist as their true species. So only by preserving their natural environment can we truly preserve their species. Now, after I graduated with my PhD, I was teaching at the college level, and I love teaching, but I was really missing working with animals, and I was really missing research. I love to ask questions about the natural world and figure out how to answer them. And so I was fortunate enough to be offered a position at the Duke Lemur Center as the research manager at that point. Now, the Duke Lemur Center is a truly unique entity, and if you haven't been there yet, I highly encourage you to visit. But at the Duke Lemur Center, we focus on individuals, species, and genetics. Now, the DLC, the Duke Lemur Center, is not a traditional sanctuary. We breed animals, which sanctuaries typically do not breed. And we don't take in pet lemurs that need homes. Even though we're often called for that, we have to refer to them to sanctuaries. We do this because part of our mission is to maintain healthy genetic lines. Essentially, we serve as a sanctuary for genetics. And so because of that, we breed according to very strictly managed species survival plans, and we can't take in animals that we don't know the background and their genetic history. We also aren't a zoo. We exist as a research center. We care for them as individuals. We study them as species so that we can learn about them as we conserve them in their species in Madagascar. And ultimately, we are protecting those genetics to ensure the lemur's continued existence, both in captivity and in the wild. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Duke Lemur Center. So we have 3 missions of education, research, and conservation. Now, I might be a bit biased because I'm the director of research, but I tend to think that research is truly the foundation for everything that we do. It's through research that we learn more about these animals and what variables are most critical to their health and their survival and their reproduction, so that we can focus our conservation efforts on those aspects of their biology and their environment. And it's also through research that we learn how amazing they are so that we can better educate the public on why they need to help us conserve their habitats and the animals. Now, at the Lemur Center, we have 13 different species of lemurs. In the wild, there exist about 110. They're an extremely diverse group of mammals. We have 13 species, about 250 individuals. Now, the lemurs are extremely diverse, much more diverse than if you were to compare the monkeys or the apes unto themselves. And so the lemurs are fantastic. You can ask a single question and study in so many different ways because of the different species that we have. And it's also important to know that as a group, lemurs are the most endangered group of mammals on the planet. So this is why the work that we do is so important. So why do we exist as a research center? Why are we doing so much research? Well, for several reasons. One, as I've already said, just to learn about lemurs themselves. For one, just for the scientific knowledge base, but also the more we learn about them, the better we can conserve them and care for them in captivity. But also, delving back into the primate family tree very quickly, lemurs are at the very root of the extant, the living primate family tree. So lemurs evolved about 65 to 70 million years ago, and they represent the most ancestral living representative of our early primate ancestor. So by studying lemurs, we learn a lot about evolutionary history. So they evolved about 30 million years before monkeys even came about, and about 60 million years before chimpanzees split from humans and bonobos. And I have this picture here. The human is represented by David Herring. He's the Duke Lemur Center's former registrar and photographer. So I have him here to remind myself to thank him for all the lemur pictures in this presentation come from him. All right, so again, why study lemurs? Because they are the most ancestral living primate, we learn a lot about evolutionary history by studying them, and then compare lemurs to monkeys to apes and can understand the biological processes that evolve through time. All right, now I know a lot of people become somewhat uncomfortable with the words primate research. There's often associated with a four-letter word, right? But not all research is bad for the animals involved. It doesn't always hurt the animals involved. And the research that we do actually benefits not only them as a species, but the actual individuals that we study actually benefit from the research that we do. Only non-invasive research is allowed at the Duke Lemur Center. So these are endangered animals. We care for them as individuals. Their well-being is our utmost priority. So we would never do anything that hurts them or causes them undue stress. All right, now we love it when research can be enriching for the animals. Now, enrichment is super important for captive animals. Enrichment basically means anything that mentally and physically keeps them stimulated and engaged. You know, lemurs, like all primates, are extremely intelligent, and they can get bored very easily. And so we need to work to keep their minds and their bodies going. And so we love it when our research can be fun and challenging for them. And we also love it when we can learn more about them and their abilities, their cognition, their manipulative abilities by giving them enrichment to play with and to destroy. And we can better manage this relationship through the use of behavioral training. So this is Meg Dye. She's our curator of behavioral management and our behavioral trainer. And she trains the lemurs, but she also trains all of us staff so that we can also train the lemurs. And so what we do is we train the lemurs using positive reinforcement, so it's all reward-based, so that they can become engaged in their own care. And so this is an example of Meg voluntarily kenneling 2 ringtail lemurs. So when lemurs have to come in for vet exams, for example, it would not work, and it would also be very stressful for both the humans and the lemurs, if we had to chase them around the forest with a net, right? That would not work. So instead, we've trained them just to walk right into a kennel, and they go in for vet treatment, and they go right back home. So it's a much less stressful process, and it's actually rewarding for them. They get treats, and they are happy. So we have trained the lemurs to do all kinds of things to help us better care for them, but also to do research. So through training, we've been able to ask next level questions that we could never do without the use of training. So a few of the fields of study that we accommodate typically that do utilize a good amount of training. One, studies of sensory behavior. So this is an example, this top left, of an eye doing a color vision study. So this is something that the eye would not understand normally. What is the goal of the study? They would become very confused and very frustrated. But through training, we're able to teach them what the goal is And then when they succeed, they get their food rewards and they're very happy. We can also use training for various aspects of studying cognition. So most of our lemur colony is trained on touchscreen computers, and they get as excited to play on them as our kids do at home. So this is Haley, the superstar of this particular study. So we can also study cognition in more naturalistic ways. For example, by putting puzzle boxes out in their environment and just watching and waiting and seeing who comes to investigate this puzzle box. Can they figure it out? Do others socially learn by watching them? And does it matter if it's a dominant female, which, by the way, if you didn't know, lemurs are mostly female dominant, so it's a really exciting society. So do youngsters better learn by watching the dominant female than by watching one of the peripheral males? Okay, I'm going to focus a little bit on one project, studying cognition, just because it's a really fun design and it's a really fun video to watch. So this was research done by Brian Hare at Duke University and his lab group. They do various studies of social cognition. This is looking at willpower. How do we control our impulses? So let me set this up. It's a very simple design. The lemur is given an opaque tube. All right, they can't see through it, but it is open on both sides. So then the training involves just putting a reward, like a grape, into one of those open sides. And the lemur just has to reach in with their mouth or their nose or their mouth or their hands and grab that reward out of the tube. We do this over and over and over until they learn that the rule to solve this challenge is simply to reach around to the side and grab that reward. Then is the test. So it's the same exact setup, but now the tube is clear. They can see through it. It still has open ends. So the question is, do they follow the rule that they learned to reach around to the side? Or now that they can see the reward, are they going to be tempted to try to reach right for it? All right, so again, it's a test of inhibition. How do you inhibit your impulses? So here is a video showing some variation in this study. Now this is just going to show one training trial and then the test, but know that we did many, many training trials first. Okay, so this is a black and white rough lemur. All right, so she got it. We did many of those. Now here's the test. All right, no problems. She didn't make a single mistake. Now here's a cockerel shafak. We use nuts for their rewards instead of fruit. All right, so we did many of those training trials. And here's the test. So, shafak are beautiful animals, not always the sharpest tool in the shed. But actually what this study found was that it wasn't so much species differences, it was more sex differences. Females tended to do better at this task than males. And there is an evolutionary reason to explain that. And I'm happy to talk more about it afterwards if we have time. All right. So other fields of study that we often accommodate that don't require training or manipulation, behavioral ecology. So one really amazing and unique thing about the Duke Lemur Center is that we have natural forest enclosures. So we have 10 different enclosures, up to 14 acres in size, where the lemurs can just free range during the warm months of the year. And so it's truly the best of both the wild and captivity, where they are protected from the stressors of the wild, but they have this ability to completely free range in a more naturalistic way. And so researchers come from all over the world just to study the lemurs be lemurs and try to figure out why they're doing what they do. It's really the only place outside of Madagascar that this can be done. The study of biomechanics, basically how does the body work? All different communication styles. So these things can be studied in a more naturalistic way at the center. All right, now we're really proud of the work that we do at the Duke Lemur Center. So we accommodate upwards of 100 research projects a year. And these are from all different levels of researcher, from undergraduate all the way through faculty and professionals. And in our history, we have trained over 800 students in the fields of research and husbandry, and conservation science to be the next environmental stewards, to be the next generation of zookeepers, and the next generation of biologists and scientists. We have, in our history, contributed to more than 1,500 peer-reviewed publications. And in terms of our conservation breeding program, we've been home to more than 39 different species of strepsirrhine primates, these ancestral primates. And more than 3,500 at this point, this is a slightly old figure, babies have been born at our center, so contributing to our goal of conservation breeding. Now, we're especially proud of the work that we do in Madagascar. We have been living in Madagascar. We have staff that live there full time and live and work with the local communities to help make their livelihoods more sustainable, and in doing so, help protect the forests and the lemurs. Now, one of the questions that I get asked most often is, so what's your ultimate goal? Are you going to be sending lemurs back to Madagascar? Well, actually, we have done that. So in the 90s, 12 lemurs, black and white ruffed lemurs, were released back to Madagascar. And it was a successful reintroduction in the sense that several of the lemurs survived, integrated into wild groups, and produced offspring. And so this helped buffer the natural population numbers in that area, and also helped to expand genetic diversity in that population. So do we have plans to do this anytime soon? Unfortunately not. It's a major undertaking to do this. They have to go through a boot camp, and it's many, many years in the making. But the main reason we can't do it right now is because the environmental destruction in Madagascar is just too massive. They have one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world. So it just wouldn't be fair to them for us to set them up for failure and kind of send them back to that. So we are working very strongly with the Malagasy community to help them and work with them to protect their forests and help their forests recover so that one day we can maybe release animals back into the wild. But until then, we are just serving as a genetic safety net until that day happens. Okay, so to wrap it all up, does sanctuary exist for wild animals? Not in totality, because there's a trade-off between the protection offered by captivity and the refuge offered by the wild. So what does sanctuary mean for wild animals? So to me, by working to protect the individuals, the species and their habitats, and their genetics, it means there's a chance. Thank you very much.
So we have some time for Q&A.
Awesome.
If you're up for it.
Awesome. Yep.
So for those of you, time check, it's like 9:45, but those of you who want to stay around for some Q&A, does anybody have any questions for Erin?
Sure. Where does your primary funding come from?
That's a great question. So we're very fortunate that Duke University funds us about 50% of our operating budget. The rest comes from our tour program. We aren't open to the public per se, but we do a lot of guided tours and a lot of outreach events. And then we also have research grants and foundation funding for various work that we do, especially our conservation work. Yes?
I grew up watching Zuma.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk about whether or not that was something that came about with like the partnership with the Lemur Center to help to get people invested in lemurs, or whether or not it was like a rescue after the show. Like what's the kind of story there?
That's a great story. So Zubumafu, for those of you who don't know, was a show by the Kratt brothers, Martin and Chris Kratt. And was it, Chris, help me out here. Chris used to work at the Lemur Center. Was it Martin that was a Duke alum? Okay. So Martin Kratt was a Duke alum. And in developing this program with his brother, he thought back to the Duke Lemur Center. And so Zabu, the name of the character in the show, the real name of that lemur was Jovian. And so they set up a set on site at the Duke Lemur Center, and we partnered with them to help spread the message about these amazing animals. And because the Kratt brothers focused so much on conservation in their shows, we thought it was a really responsible show to become involved with and to help motivate the younger generations. And by God, it worked. I mean, we still have visitors come out that say they grew up loving Zubumafu and they want to meet Jovian's family. Unfortunately, Jovian's no longer alive, but we still have his granddaughter and her family still at the center. Yes?
What did you learn about the communication styles of lemurs
Oh gosh, that's a big question. So lemurs primarily communicate through olfactory communication. So they are more ancestral. So in that way, in terms of their senses, they're more like raccoons and other mammals than they are like other monkeys, other primates like monkeys and apes. Monkeys and apes, including humans, we rely more on the sense of sight than on smell. But the more ancestral primates, including lemurs, rely more on their sense of smell. So pretty much everything about them is through olfactory communication. So they can even smell genetic diversity of the MHC complex, which is like immune system complex. So females are able to choose a male that has a disparate allele, essentially, for immune system, to have an infant that has a more complete immune complex. So they can smell pretty much any information. So we do a lot of work focusing on olfactory communication with them. Yeah.
How did you track the 12 lemurs that were sent back into the wild in progress?
So they had radio collars on so that they could be tracked, and then they were also tracked just by human observation. There was several field assistants that worked to follow them. So they were followed for many years until we could no longer keep contact with them. So we know they were released in 3 different sets. So the first set of 5, which all came from Duke, so they were called the Carolina 5. 2 of them died, 1 due to a fall and 1 due to a Fusa attack. But the others did survive and integrate with wild animals, with wild lemurs, and reproduce. So that was exciting. The second set that was released wasn't as successful. The third set had great success with 1, don't remember if it was a male or female, was able to be tracked for over 10 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything we can do with our purchase decisions, for example, to help limit the deforestation in Madagascar?
Absolutely. There's a lot you can do. And again, I'm going to invite Chris, if he has any suggestions here, to speak up, because this was what he used to do at the Lemur Center. But by not using rosewood and other materials like that, rosewood is primarily harvested in Madagascar. So that's one way, is by not using those really specialized woods that come and aren't sustainably harvested. Another is to eat less red meat because of the deforestation that's necessary to raise cattle. Things like recycling your cell phones, that mineral coltan that's in your cell phone, it's only found in certain parts of Africa. I'm not sure if it's Madagascar, but it's certain parts of Africa. And so the less we recycle our cell phones, the more that mineral has to be mined in not a very sustainable way. So those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Chris, do you have any that you want to add?
If you're particularly concerned about lemurs in Madagascar, you can always support the Duke Lemur Center.
There you go. Well, I like that answer.
That's my job to tell people.
Yes, and you did it well. We do offer tours to Madagascar through the Duke Lemur Center, where it's kind of a guided tour through different sites of Madagascar. So that's a great way to also become engaged and learn more about the country itself and the conservation work that we're doing. So if you're interested in joining that tour, please reach out to me and I can put you in contact with our Director of Conservation. Yeah?
You mentioned the boot camp that the lemurs that were released go through, so it's kind of a two-part question. Like, what was that boot camp like for them, and how did you know that like they would be, accepted in the wild?
On some level, we just had to go on faith, and we wouldn't know that, But because the Duke Lemur Center has the amazing setup with our free-ranging enclosures, it provides a natural boot camp for them. So we had some animals that were already living at the Lemur Center that had been free-ranging most of their lives, and they knew how to naturally forage and how to jump and how to navigate the trees in a three-dimensional environment. But then we also brought in animals from other AZA-accredited, American Zoological Association accredited institutions, again, because we wanted to release animals that had the best genetic diversity. So for animals that weren't as used to free ranging as the Duke Lemur Center's animals, they were transferred to the Duke Lemur Center for a good year or 2, so they could acclimate to our free ranging enclosures and get to kind of get their forest feet under them. And so it was a long process of slowly cutting back how much food they were supplemented, so they had to forage more and more on their own, things of that nature. Knowing could they acclimate in different temperatures, even when it got a little bit colder. And so it was really just very carefully monitoring their progress, setting them up for challenges in a way that would mimic wild challenges. And then we just had to go on faith. Yeah.
Why are the female lemurs evolutionarily more clever than males?
I'm glad you came back to that. So if you think about what the limiting factor is for a female's biology, her reproductive biology, it's food, right? So she has to find enough food to survive, but also to sustain pregnancy and to sustain lactation, and often enough food to keep her infants alive as well, once they start eating solid food. Males, their limiting factor, at least biologically and reproductive speaking, isn't food, because they don't typically directly assist with parental caretaking. They just have to find enough food for themselves. So a male's biological limitation factor is females. So males focus on, they're really good at strategies to get the girl, right? Whereas females have to evolve strategies to get the food. And so that's why in these tests that are very food motivated and food driven, females tend to do better because they are naturally have evolved mechanisms to know how to get that food.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah, one more
one more.
question, I think.
Does the introduction of sort of like iPads or more human-centered techniques,
Mhm.
does that influence their future behavior or like lead to them being domesticated in some way, or does that skew your results?
Not really. I mean, it's a good question. It's definitely not a natural behavior. So it would skew certain aspects if you were studying natural behavior, but for these studies, we're not studying natural behavior. But it doesn't skew their overall behavior because they just play on these computers for like 10 minutes a day, a few times a week. So it's a very limited amount of screen time for them. I forgot what your other parts of your question were.
Just more like, does it skew it because it's a very human or sort of domesticated, like a domesticated animal?
Right. No, it doesn't skew them in that. I mean, primates will never become domesticated because they are, for one, so smart, and two, dangerous. And so that combination makes it so that primates, including lemurs, won't become domesticated. And so we don't have to be worried about that, but we work really hard at the Lemur Center to ensure that the lemurs are lemurs, and we limit any type of human interaction with them. Like, we don't pet them, as much as that might sound disappointing to some of you. We don't hold them, we don't pet them. They are lemurs, and we want them to be lemurs. And so we are very minimal in our interaction with them and what we impose on them in terms of things that are more humanized. So it's very minimized according to relative to the rest of their day and their week and their years. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Erin. Everybody give her a round of applause.
Thank you, guys.